April 26, 1986. At exactly 1:23 in the morning, the world changed forever. In the darkness of northern Ukraine, inside a nuclear power plant known as Chernobyl, a routine safety test was underway. The operators inside reactor number 4 believed they were conducting a simple experiment. They were wrong. Within seconds, a chain of events would unleash one of the most destructive technological disasters in human history. An explosion powerful enough to tear apart a nuclear reactor. A radioactive cloud that would spread across Europe. Entire cities abandoned overnight. Thousands of lives changed forever. And a disaster so shocking that even today, nearly 4 decades later, the name Chernobyl remains synonymous with catastrophe. But how did it happen? Was it human error? A fatal design flaw? Government secrecy? Or a combination of all three? This is the story of the disaster that shocked the world. This is the story of Chernobyl. To understand Chernobyl, we must first travel back to the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States were locked in a fierce competition. Both superpowers raced to prove their technological superiority. Space exploration, military power, scientific achievement, and nuclear energy. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union was rapidly expanding its nuclear power program. Nuclear energy represented the future. It promised virtually limitless electricity. Factories could run day and night. Cities could grow. Entire regions could be transformed. Among the many nuclear plants constructed across the Soviet Union was the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Located approximately 130 kilometers north of Kiev, the facility was designed to become one of the largest power stations in the country. Nearby, Soviet authorities built a modern city called Pripyat. Pripyat was more than just a town. It was a symbol of Soviet progress. Wide boulevards, modern apartments, schools, hospitals, parks, swimming pools, an amusement park under construction. The average age of residents was only around 26 years old. Nearly 50,000 people called Pripyat home. Most of them worked directly or indirectly for the power plant. Life seemed stable, prosperous, safe. Nobody knew that one day this thriving city would become a ghost town. At the heart of the power plant stood 4 massive RBMK 1000 nuclear reactors. The Soviet government praised these reactors as reliable and efficient. But hidden deep within their design was a dangerous flaw. One that few operators fully understood. One that would eventually change history. To understand the disaster, we need to understand how a nuclear reactor works. Inside a reactor, atoms of uranium split apart in a process known as nuclear fission. This releases enormous amounts of heat. The heat turns water into steam. The steam drives turbines. The turbines generate electricity. The process is remarkably efficient. But it requires constant control. If the nuclear reaction becomes too powerful, temperatures can rise rapidly. To prevent this, reactors use control rods. These rods absorb neutrons and slow the reaction. In most reactors, pressing the emergency shutdown button immediately reduces power. But the RBMK reactor contained a fatal weakness. Its control rods had graphite tips. Under certain conditions, inserting these rods could briefly increase the reaction before reducing it. Was a dangerous characteristic. One known by some engineers. Yet it was never fully communicated to plant operators. 4 years, the flaw remained hidden, waiting for the perfect conditions to reveal itself. Those conditions would arrive on April 25, 1986. The purpose of the experiment seemed harmless. Engineers wanted to know whether the turbines could continue generating enough electricity during a power outage. Specifically, they wanted to determine if the spinning turbines could temporarily power emergency cooling systems until backup generators activated. It was a reasonable safety question. But the test had already failed several times in the past. This would be another attempt. On April 25, operators began reducing reactor power. The procedure should have been straightforward. Instead, delays occurred. Electricity demand from Kiev forced operators to postpone critical steps. Hours passed. Shift changes took place. New workers inherited a reactor operating under unusual conditions. As night approached, mistakes began to accumulate. Power levels dropped far lower than intended. The reactor entered an unstable state. Operators attempted to restore power. To achieve this, they disabled several safety systems. Warning signals appeared, rules were ignored. Procedures were bypassed. One by one, layers of protection disappeared. Yet the test continued. Inside the control room, nobody fully realized how dangerous the situation had become. Reactor number 4 was no longer operating normally. It was becoming a ticking time bomb. The clock approached 1:23 in the morning. The test began. Steam flow changed. Power fluctuations increased. Conditions inside the reactor became increasingly unstable. Then came the moment that changed everything. Operators pressed the AZ5 button. The emergency shutdown system. The button designed to save the reactor. The button that should have ended the crisis. Instead, it triggered catastrophe. As the control rods entered the reactor, their graphite tips caused a sudden surge in reactivity. Power skyrocketed. Not by a few percent. Not by a few 100%. But by an unimaginable amount. Within seconds, the reactor's output exploded far beyond its design limits. Fuel channels ruptured. Steam pressure surged. The reactor core began tearing itself apart. Then came the first explosion. A massive steam blast ripped through the reactor building. Concrete slabs weighing hundreds of tons were thrown into the air. Moments later, a second explosion followed. The roof was destroyed. The reactor core was exposed directly to the atmosphere. For the first time in history, an operating nuclear reactor had exploded catastrophically. The night sky above Chernobyl glowed with an eerie blue light. Graphite blocks from the reactor rained across the facility. Fires erupted everywhere. And deadly radiation poured into the environment. Yet many workers still did not understand what had happened. Some believed a water tank had exploded. Others thought the reactor remained intact. The truth was almost unimaginable. The reactor was gone. Minutes after the explosion, emergency crews arrived. Firefighters rushed toward the burning power plant. They had no idea they were walking into one of the most radioactive environments ever created. Their mission was simple. Stop the fires. Protect the remaining reactors. Prevent a larger disaster. The men climbed onto rooftops littered with burning debris. Many unknowingly stepped on pieces of highly radioactive graphite from the reactor core. Radiation levels were so extreme that exposure lasting only minutes could prove fatal. Yet they continued working. Hoses sprayed water onto flames. Firefighters carried equipment across contaminated surfaces. No protective suits. No understanding of the danger. Only duty. Many soon began experiencing strange symptoms. Metallic tastes. Headaches. Nausea. Vomiting. Their skin reddened as if burned by the sun. But these were not ordinary burns. They were symptoms of acute radiation sickness. By dawn, dozens of first responders had received lethal doses of radiation. Many would die within weeks. Their sacrifice prevented the fires from spreading further and potentially triggering an even greater catastrophe. Their courage remains one of the most heroic chapters in the history of disaster response. Just 3 kilometers away stood Pripyat. Its residents slept peacefully. Children rested in their beds. Families prepared for another ordinary Saturday. Few knew that radioactive particles were already drifting across the city. Many residents woke to a strange sight. A glow on the horizon. Smoke rising above the power plant. People gathered on balconies. Some watched from bridges. Others took photographs. No evacuation orders came. No public warnings were issued. Authorities hesitated. Admitting the scale of the disaster would mean admitting a failure. For nearly 36 hours, residents remained in place. Meanwhile, radiation levels continued rising. Children played outdoors. People walked to markets. Life appeared normal. But invisible contamination covered streets, buildings, parks, and homes. By the time evacuation finally began, thousands had already received unnecessary radiation exposure. April 27th, hundreds of buses entered the city. Residents received a brief announcement. They were told to bring identification documents and essential belongings. They would be away for only a few days. That was the official message. Few suspected the truth. Families boarded buses. Children carried toys. Pets were left behind. Doors were locked. Meals remained on tables. Laundry hung on balconies. As the convoy departed, thousands looked back at their city. Most believed they would return soon. They never did. Pripyat became a ghost city almost overnight. An entire community vanished. Frozen in time. Even today, abandoned schools, apartments, and amusement rides remain as haunting reminders of that day. The explosion was only the beginning. The exposed reactor continued releasing radioactive material into the atmosphere. Soviet leaders faced an unprecedented crisis. Helicopter crews flew directly above the reactor. Pilots dropped sand, clay, lead, and boron into the burning core. Thousands of soldiers, engineers, miners, and workers were mobilized. Collectively, they became known as the liquidators. Their task was monumental. Clean rooftops. Remove radioactive debris. Construct barriers. Contain contamination. Many worked under dangerous conditions. Some were allowed only seconds in highly contaminated areas before retreating. Yet they returned again and again. Without their efforts, the consequences could have been far worse. Among the most dangerous missions involved clearing radioactive debris from nearby rooftops. Machines failed because radiation damaged electronics. As a result, human workers had to perform the task manually. Running across rooftops. Shoveling debris. Returning before receiving excessive exposure. It was a race against radiation itself. Initially, Soviet authorities attempted to keep the disaster secret. But radiation cannot be hidden. 2 days after the explosion, workers at a nuclear facility in Sweden detected unusually high radiation levels. At first, they suspected a local accident. Investigations quickly revealed the contamination had come from elsewhere. Evidence pointed toward the Soviet Union. International pressure mounted. Eventually, Soviet officials acknowledged the disaster. The world was stunned. A radioactive cloud had spread across multiple countries. Contamination was detected throughout Europe. Governments issued warnings. Scientists monitored radiation levels. News organizations covered the unfolding crisis. For many people, Chernobyl shattered confidence in nuclear safety. The disaster became a global symbol of technological failure and government secrecy. The immediate death toll was relatively small compared to many industrial disasters. But Chernobyl's true impact unfolded over decades. Workers and firefighters exposed to intense radiation suffered severe illnesses. Many died painful deaths within weeks or months. Thousands more experienced long-term health effects. One of the most significant consequences involved thyroid cancer. Radioactive iodine contaminated food supplies and entered human bodies. Children proved especially vulnerable. Across affected regions, cancer rates increased significantly. Scientists continue studying the disaster today. While exact numbers remain debated, there is no doubt that Chernobyl affected countless lives. Beyond physical illness came psychological trauma, fear, displacement, uncertainty. Entire communities lost their homes. Many survivors carried emotional scars for the rest of their lives. Containing reactor number 4 became a long-term challenge. In the months following the disaster, Soviet engineers constructed a massive concrete structure around the destroyed reactor. Known as the sarcophagus, it was designed to trap radioactive material. But it was never intended to last forever. Over time, the structure deteriorated. A more permanent solution became necessary. Decades later, an enormous steel arch known as the new safe confinement was built. The structure was one of the largest movable buildings ever constructed. Carefully positioned over the reactor ruins, it now helps contain radiation and allows ongoing cleanup efforts. Engineers estimate it will protect the site for at least the next century. Today, the exclusion zone surrounding Chernobyl remains one of the most famous abandoned places on Earth. Nature has reclaimed much of the area. Forests have grown where people once lived. Animals roam through empty streets. Yet the scars of the disaster remain. Chernobyl was not caused by a single mistake. It was the result of flawed technology, poor decisions, ignored warnings, and a system that discouraged transparency. The disaster changed nuclear safety standards around the world. It influenced energy policy. It exposed the dangers of secrecy. And it demonstrated the devastating consequences that can occur when human error meets technological risk. Nearly 40 years later, the name Chernobyl still evokes images of abandoned cities, heroic sacrifices, and invisible danger. He stands as a reminder that progress without accountability can lead to catastrophe. A reminder written in concrete, steel, radiation, and memory. And a reminder the world must never forget. Because on a quiet spring night in April 1986, a routine safety test became one of the most consequential disasters in human history. A disaster that shocked the world. The disaster called Chernobyl.